The house was still when he returned, too still for a home with children. Then it happened. A sound so soft and uncertain that it didn't seem possible. Mommy, ready to dive in and enjoy the story? Then hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this might be the only moment we have together unless you subscribe. This also ensures you're notified immediately when we drop a new story, as we do every day. Now back to the story. William Archer froze in the hallway. His briefcase slipped from his grip and hit the marble floor with a muffled thud. He stood motionless, his eyes locked on what he was witnessing. His twins, Noah and Nora, who had never spoken a single word in their lives, were sitting on the playroom rug, their small bodies leaning toward the maid kneeling before them. Brielle Carter, dressed in her simple gray uniform, her hands still damp from the kitchen, had both arms open toward them. Her voice was gentle, almost a whisper. "I know, sweetheart. I'm right here." Then it came again. "Mommy," this time from the other twin. For a moment, everything inside William stopped. His breath caught, his pulse loud in his ears, his body rigid. His children, diagnosed with selective mutism since birth, were shaping words and calling out to someone who wasn't him. He had just stepped through the front door minutes ago, exhausted from a week in London. The jet lag still clung to him. He'd set his keys on the marble console table, loosened his tie, and expected the usual silence that greeted him every time he came home. The kind of silence that had become normal. Safe even, but this wasn't silence. This was something else entirely. William moved closer to the doorway of the playroom, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. His polished shoes made no sound on the thick hallway runner. His heart hammered against his ribs. Nora's small hands stretched toward Brielle. Her fingers trembled slightly, but they moved with intention. Noah, sitting beside his sister, tilted his head and made a soft sound. Not quite a word, but close. So close. Brielle reached forward and took Nora's hand gently. "That's it, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're doing so well." William's throat tightened. He had hired specialists from 3 countries, spent hundreds of thousands on therapy equipment, developmental programs, custom-designed sensory rooms. He had read every study, consulted every expert, tried every method, and his children had remained silent, unreachable. But now, here they were, responding, speaking, moving. To her, not to him. William pressed his back against the wall, his breath shallow. He felt the weight of 4 years collapse on him all at once. The fear, the exhaustion, the guilt he never let himself name. He should go in. He should say something. But he couldn't move. Because if he stepped into that room, if he shattered this fragile moment, what would be left? So he stayed in the shadows, and he watched the impossible unfold in front of him, led by a woman he barely knew, in a voice softer than anything he had ever been able to offer. Who do you think stood for what is right in this story so far? Who acted out of fear or selfishness? I want to hear your take. Drop your answer in the comments. William didn't remember walking to his study, but suddenly he was there, standing in the center of the room. The door closed behind him. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the surface of his desk and forced himself to breathe. In, out, slow, controlled. But control was a lie he'd been telling himself for 4 years. The memory came without warning, sharp and unforgiving. The hospital room, the fluorescent lights, the sound of machines beeping in rhythm with his wife's fading heartbeat. "Mr. Archer, we're losing her." He had stood frozen then too, just like he had in the hallway moments ago. Useless, silent, watching everything fall apart. They'd pulled the twins from her body in a rush of blood and panic. 2 tiny, fragile lives traded for the one he couldn't imagine living without. And then the doctor's words, delivered in that flat, clinical tone that made horror sound like policy. "The babies are alive, but there may be complications. Developmental delays, cognitive impairment. We won't know the extent for some time. William had nodded. He'd signed papers. He'd made arrangements. He'd buried his wife on a Tuesday. And by Wednesday, he'd begun building walls. He hired the best neonatal team in the country, installed monitors in every room, created schedules down to the minute, feeding times, therapy sessions, doctor's appointments, everything documented, everything controlled. He told himself it was love, but it wasn't. It was fear, dressed up in efficiency, because if he kept everything structured, if he followed the protocols and trusted the experts, then maybe he wouldn't lose them too. But somewhere along the way, structure became distance. He stopped holding them when they cried, stopped sitting with them during feedings. He hired people for that, people who were trained, people who wouldn't break. And the twins stopped reaching for him. By the time they turned 2, the house had become a museum. Clean, quiet, perfectly managed, empty. William looked around his study now. The leather chairs no one sat in, the books he'd never opened, the awards lining the shelves like tombstones for a life he used to care about. He had everything, and he had nothing. He sank into his chair and covered his face with his hands. The truth he'd been running from finally caught up to him. He wasn't protecting his children. He was hiding from them. Because every time he looked at Noah and Nora, he saw her. He saw the moment she slipped away. He saw the price of their existence, and he couldn't bear it. So he left them in the care of strangers. Professional, paid, distant. And now a young woman with no degree and no training had reached them in ways he never could, because she wasn't afraid. Oh, she didn't see loss when she looked at them. She just saw 2 children who needed someone to stay. Hit subscribe if you never want to stand with people who act with this kind of coldness, choosing control over connection. The ones who agree with this type of behavior are the ones who won't subscribe. William exhaled slowly, his chest tight with something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Regret. William didn't confront her. He didn't ask questions. He just watched. Over the next few days, he found himself lingering in doorways, pausing in hallways, delaying meetings so he could observe what happened when Brielle entered a room. She moved through the house with a quiet ease that felt out of place in a home built on rigidity. No rush, no hesitation, just steady, unhurried presence. In the mornings, she brought the twins their breakfast and sat with them on the floor. She didn't try to make them eat. She just described what was on the plate. Soft scrambled eggs, toast cut into small squares, sliced strawberries. See this, Noah? It's sweet. You might like it, she said gently, holding up a piece of fruit. Noah didn't respond, but his eyes followed her hand. She smiled anyway. Later, William watched from the second-floor landing as she folded laundry in the sitting room. The twins were on a blanket nearby, surrounded by toys they rarely touched. Brielle hummed while she worked, something soft and rhythmic. Her hands moved in slow, deliberate motions. Fold, smooth, stack. She narrated as she went. I'm folding this blue shirt now. It's soft, isn't it? Your daddy wore this one last week. She glanced over at Nora, who was staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. You watching me, sweetheart? Brielle asked with a small smile. Nora didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. William's chest tightened. In the afternoons, Brielle sat with the twins during their scheduled sensory time. The therapist had left behind textured boards, musical instruments, weighted blankets, all tools meant to stimulate response. But Brielle didn't use them. Instead, she brushed Nora's hair with a soft bristled brush, counting each stroke aloud. 1, 2, 3. Your hair is so pretty, Nora, just like your mama's. She took Noah's small hand in hers and traced circles on his palm with her thumb. She didn't ask him to squeeze back. She didn't test him. She just touched him. gently, patiently, and Noah's body, usually so stiff and tense, softened. William noticed it immediately, the way his son's shoulders dropped, the way his breathing slowed. It was something he hadn't seen in years. Peace. The twins didn't speak again. Not that week, not in any moment William witnessed. But their eyes followed Brielle everywhere. When she left the room, Nora's gaze would linger on the doorway. When she returned, Noah's head would turn toward her voice before she even appeared. They were waiting for her, trusting her. William stood in the shadows of his own home and realized something that made his stomach turn. His children had never looked at him that way. Not once, not ever. They didn't wait for him to come back. They didn't soften when he was near, because he had never given them a reason to. He had given them everything money could buy. But Brielle had given them something else entirely. She had given them herself. Like this video, if you believe people like Brielle deserve support, only people who excuse neglect and coldness will scroll past. William called her into his office on a Thursday morning. He'd rehearsed what he would say, kept his tone measured, professional. He wasn't angry, he told himself that. He just needed answers. Brielle knocked twice before entering. She stepped inside, her posture calm but cautious, hands folded in front of her. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Archer?" "Close the door," he said. She did. William gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She sat, her back straight, her expression unreadable. He didn't waste time. "What did you do to make them speak?" Brielle blinked. "I'm sorry?" "My children," William said, his voice sharper than he intended. "They spoke. To you, I heard it. So I need to know, what method did you use? What technique?" She hesitated, confusion flickering across her face. I didn't use a technique, Mr. Archer." "Then what did you do?" "I just talked to them." William leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "Talk to them." "Yes." "That's it?" Brielle nodded slowly. "I talk to them. I sing sometimes, read them stories before bed. I hold their hands when they seem scared." She paused. "I just spend time with them." William stared at her, waiting for more. There had to be more. But she just sat there, looking at him like she'd said everything there was to say. "That's it?" he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Yes, Mr. Archer." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Miss Carter, I've hired specialists from Johns Hopkins, consultants from Sweden, therapists trained in the most advanced developmental programs in the world. You're telling me that what they couldn't accomplish in 4 years, you did by reading bedtime stories?" Brielle's expression didn't change. "I'm not telling you I accomplished anything, sir. I'm just telling you what I do." "And you think that's enough?" "I think," she said carefully, "that Noah and Nora aren't broken. They're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to see them." The words hung in the air between them. William felt his chest tighten, heat rising up the back of his neck. "That's not how medicine works, Miss Carter. That's not how therapy works. Children don't just—" He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Brielle said quietly, "but I know what I see." "And what's that?" "2 kids who want to be loved." The silence that followed was suffocating. William stood abruptly. "Thank you for your time, Miss Carter." "That will be all." Brielle rose slowly, her face calm but her eyes searching his for something he couldn't name. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle, and turned back. "They're not a problem to solve, Mr. Archer," she said softly. "They're your children." Then she left. William stood alone in his office, fists clenched at his sides, her words echoing louder than he could stand. If you know you're not on the side of people who treat loved ones like projects to be fixed, type your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. William sent Brielle out the next morning. I need you to pick up a prescription from the pharmacy across town, he told her. Take your time. She looked at him for a moment, something unreadable in her eyes, then nodded. Of course, Mr. Archer. He waited until her car disappeared down the driveway. Then he went to the twins. They were in the playroom, sitting on the rug in their usual spots. Nora held a stuffed rabbit loosely in her lap. Noah stared at the wall. William stood in the doorway, a box of developmental toys in his arms. The latest models, recommended by a neurologist in Boston. Touch response sensors, auditory stimulation devices, visual tracking games. He set the box down and pulled out the first toy, a soft cube that lit up and played music when squeezed. Noah, he said, keeping his voice calm, controlled. Look at this. He pressed the cube, lights flashed. A cheerful melody played. Noah didn't turn his head. William moved closer, kneeling on the floor in front of his son. He held the cube out. It's okay. You can touch it. Nothing. He tried with Nora next, a textured board designed to engage fine motor skills. He guided her hand toward it, but her fingers stayed limp, unresponsive. Come on, Nora, he whispered. Just try. She stared past him. William pulled out another toy and another. He played the videos the specialists had sent. Gentle animations with slow movements and soft sounds meant to hold a child's attention. The twins sat motionless. An hour passed, then another. William's chest grew tighter with every failed attempt. He heard his own voice growing strained, desperate. Please, he finally said, barely above a whisper. Please just look at me. But they didn't. They sat in their separate worlds, untouched by anything he offered. The sound of the front door opening made him freeze. Footsteps in the hallway, soft, familiar. Brielle appeared in the doorway, a pharmacy bag in her hand. She stopped when she saw him on the floor, surrounded by toys and flashing screens. Mr. Archer. He stood quickly, brushing off his slacks. He didn't finish. Brielle set the bag down gently and stepped into the room. She didn't say anything. She just walked over to the twins and knelt beside them. Hey, sweethearts, she said softly. I missed you. Nora's head turned, her small hand lifted, and she reached for Brielle. William's breath stopped. Brielle took Nora's hand and smiled. There you are. Noah shifted slightly, his gaze moving toward her voice. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was everything. William stood in the hallway now, just outside the door. His fist clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. He had spent 2 hours trying to reach them. She walked into the room and they responded in seconds. The truth settled over him like a weight he couldn't lift. He wasn't failing because his methods were wrong. He was failing because he was the wrong person. And no amount of money, no degree, no expertise could change that. What lesson did this teach you about people who think money can replace presence, Umana? Type your answer. I want to hear what you saw. William couldn't sleep. He'd been lying in bed for hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon over and over in his mind. The way Nora had reached for Brielle, the way Noah had turned toward her voice, the way they had ignored him completely. He threw off the covers and stood, pacing the length of his room. The house was silent, dark. Then he heard it, singing, faint, delicate, coming from down the hall. He stopped mid-step, his heart skipping. The melody was familiar, painfully familiar. William moved toward the sound, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He followed it to the twins' room, where the door was cracked open just enough to let a sliver of soft light spill into the hallway. He stopped at the threshold and looked inside. Brielle sat in the rocking chair between the two cribs, her head tilted back slightly, eyes half closed. She was humming. No, singing, softly. A lullaby he hadn't heard in over 4 years, his wife's lullaby. William's breath caught in his chest. The melody wrapped around him, pulling him back to a moment he had buried. His wife, 8 months pregnant, sitting in the same room, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she hummed this exact tune. She'd written it herself, for them, for Noah and Nora. He'd forgotten, or maybe he'd forced himself to forget. Brielle's voice faded and she opened her eyes. She must have sensed him there because she turned, startled. "Mr. Archer," she whispered, standing quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Where did you hear that?" His voice was rough, strained. Brielle hesitated. Then she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She held it carefully, like it might fall apart in her hands. "I found this," she said quietly, "in the drawer of the changing." "I wasn't snooping. I just—" She stopped, then handed it to him. William took it with trembling fingers. He opened the notebook and saw her handwriting immediately. His wife's looping script filled the pages, lyrics, little sketches of baby faces, notes about hopes and dreams she'd had for the twins. "Sing this to them when they're scared," one note read. "Let them know I'm still here." His throat closed. "I thought—" Brielle's voice was barely a whisper. "I thought maybe they'd recognize it. Maybe some part of them would remember." William couldn't speak. He stared at the pages, his vision blurring. The past hadn't just returned. It had been here all along. Waiting, he closed the notebook carefully and looked up at Brielle. Her eyes were soft, understanding. "She loved them," Brielle said gently. "You can feel it in every word." William nodded, unable to trust his voice. For the first time in 4 years, he let himself remember his wife not as the woman he lost, but as the mother she'd wanted to be. And it broke something in him he didn't know was still holding on. Who do you think stood for what is right in this story? Who acted out of fear or grief in a way that hurt the people they loved? I want to hear your take. Drop your answer in the comments. The storm came without warning. William woke to the crack of thunder so loud it rattled the windows. Rain hammered against the roof, relentless and violent. Then he heard it, crying, not loud, not even clear, but unmistakable. He threw off the covers and ran down the hall, his heart pounding. The twins' door was already open. Brielle was there. She must have heard them first. She was kneeling between the cribs, still in her sleep clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. Noah and Nora were sitting up, their small bodies trembling, eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Brielle was saying softly. "It's just noise. You're safe." Another crack of thunder split the air. Nora flinched, a choked whimper escaping her throat. Brielle reached into the crib and lifted her out gently, cradling her against her chest. Then she reached for Noah with her other arm, pulling him close. Both twins clung to her, shaking. William stood frozen in the doorway, unsure what to do, unsure if there was anything he could do. Brielle began to hum, the lullaby. Her voice was quiet, barely audible over the storm, but steady. She rocked gently, her cheek resting against Nora's head. The twins' trembling began to ease. Then the lightning flashed, bright and blinding. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the walls. And Noah spoke. "Mama." It was so soft, William almost didn't hear it, but he did. Then Nora, her voice small and broken. "Mama." Not to him, to her. William's knees buckled. He sank to the floor beside them, his chest tight, his hands shaking. Brielle looked at him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. She didn't say anything. She just kept humming. Another rumble of thunder rolled through, farther away this time. William reached out slowly and placed a hand on Noah's back. His son didn't pull away. William's breath hitched. He moved closer until he was kneeling right beside Brielle, close enough to feel the warmth of the twins pressed between them. He didn't try to take them from her. He didn't try to prove he could comfort them. He just stayed. The storm raged outside, but inside the room, something else was happening. Something fragile, something real. Brielle kept humming and the twins' breathing began to slow. Their grip on her loosened slightly. their bodies growing heavy with exhaustion. William watched them, watched the way Nora's eyes fluttered closed, the way Noah's head rested against Brielle's shoulder. He had spent 4 years trying to fix them. But they were never broken. They were just waiting for someone to hold them through the storm. And for the first time, William understood. Love wasn't a solution. It was presence. He stayed there on the floor beside Brielle until the storm passed, until the twins fell asleep in her arms, until the silence returned. Softer this time, less empty. And when Brielle finally looked at him, he didn't look away. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded, and for the first time in 4 years, William didn't feel alone. Like this video, if you believe people like Brielle, who show up with love even when it's hard, deserve support. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, soft and hesitant. William found Brielle at the counter, preparing breakfast. The twins were still asleep upstairs, and the house was wrapped in a fragile quiet that felt different from the silence he'd grown used to. "Miss Carter," he said from the doorway. She turned surprised. "Mr. Archer, can I get you something?" "No, I just—" He paused, then stepped into the kitchen. "I wanted to talk, if you have a moment." Brielle set down the knife she'd been using to slice fruit. "Of course." They sat at the small table by the window. William realized he'd never sat here before. This was the staff table. But nothing about the past few days had followed the old rules. "I don't know much about you," William said carefully. "I hired you through an agency. I saw your references, your background check. But I never asked about you." Brielle folded her hands in her lap. "What would you like to know?" "Last night," he began, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "You knew exactly what to do. You didn't hesitate. I need to understand why." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "I grew up in foster care," she finally said. 7 different homes between the ages of 5 and 18. William's chest tightened. "Some of them were fine, some weren't. But in all of them, I was just a placement, a name on a file. I learned early that love wasn't something you could count on." She looked down at her hands. "So I decided I'd give it anyway, even when I didn't get it back." "Why?" "Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible," she said softly. "And I promised myself I'd never let a child feel that way if I could help it." William couldn't speak. The weight of her words settled over him like stone. "When I started working here," Brielle continued, "I saw Noah and Nora, and I saw myself. 2 kids surrounded by everything except the one thing they needed." "What's that?" William whispered, though he already knew. "Someone to see them, really see them." His throat burned. "I failed them." "You were grieving," Brielle said gently. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed, "but it's a reason." William's voice cracked. "I didn't know how to be their father without her." "You still can be." He looked up, eyes red. "How?" "By staying," Brielle said simply. "By being there even when it's hard, even when you don't have the answers." Silence filled the space between them. "Thank you," William finally said, his voice barely holding, "for doing what I couldn't." Brielle shook her head. "I didn't do it for you, Mr. Archer. I did it for them." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." That night the twins slept deeply. No stirring, no whimpers. William stood in their doorway and watched their small chests rise and fall in steady rhythm. The house felt different. It wasn't silent anymore. It was peaceful. For the first time in 4 years, it felt like a home. What lesson did this teach you about people who choose presence over perfection? Type your answer. I want to hear what you saw. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Brielle held it in her hands at the kitchen table, her expression unreadable. William noticed it immediately when he came downstairs. "Everything all right?" he asked. She looked up, hesitant. "I received a job offer." His stomach dropped. A job offer. She nodded slowly. From the Brookstone Children's Therapy Institute. They heard about my work with Noah and Nora through one of the specialists you consulted. They want me to join their residential care program. She paused. The pay is significant, and it's a real career, not just this, William finished quietly. I didn't say that. But it's true. Brielle set the letter down. I don't know what to do. William looked past her through the doorway into the living room. Noah and Nora were on the rug playing quietly. Nora held a stuffed rabbit. Noah stacked soft blocks, his movements careful and deliberate. They both glanced toward the kitchen, toward Brielle, waiting, always waiting for her. William's chest tightened. He'd spent 4 years building walls, hiring professionals, keeping everyone at a safe distance. And now the one person who'd broken through was about to leave. He turned back to Brielle. What do you want? She blinked, surprised. I'm not sure that matters. It's the only thing that matters. She looked down at her hands, conflict written across her face. I care about them. More than I expected to. They need you, William said. They need their father. They need both. Brielle met his eyes. William took a breath. Stay. Mr. Archer, not as a maid, he said firmly. Not as staff. Stay as part of this family. Let me pay you what you're worth. Let me give you the title you deserve. Just don't go. Brielle's eyes glistened. William. It was the first time she'd used his first name. A sound came from the doorway. They both turned. Noah stood there, one small hand gripping the door frame for balance. Nora was right behind him. Both of them were staring at Brielle. Nora took a shaky step forward, then another. She reached out with both arms. Mama, she whispered. Noah echoed her, his voice soft but clear. Mama. Brielle's breath hitched. She knelt down and the twins moved toward her, wrapping their small arms around her neck. She held them close, tears streaming down her face. William watched, his own throat tight. Brielle looked up at him over their heads, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not going anywhere. Weeks later, the mansion was full of sound. Nora hummed while she colored at the low table in the sunroom, her tongue poking out in concentration. Noah babbled softly during meals, experimenting with sounds and syllables, his eyes bright with curiosity. Brielle read to them every night, her voice a steady anchor in the quiet dark. And William, he sat on the floor with them now, learning to play, learning to listen, learning to be present in a way he'd forgotten was possible. One afternoon, all 4 of them were in the garden. The sun was warm, the grass soft beneath them. Brielle was blowing bubbles and the twins were chasing them with unsteady steps, their laughter spilling out in breathy, joyful bursts. Laughter, real laughter. William heard it and stopped breathing. It was the first time. Nora stumbled and fell gently onto the grass, giggling. Noah clapped his hands, delighted. Brielle looked over at William, her face glowing with happiness. He smiled back, something breaking open inside his chest. For 4 years he had been surviving, but now, right now, he was living. He closed his eyes, feeling the sun on his face, hearing his children's laughter in the air. And for the first time since he'd lost his wife, William Archer felt whole again. Share this with someone who has faced people who chose control over connection. Let's make sure more people don't fall into the hands of coldness disguised as responsibility. And if you believe good people should never be quiet when faced with emotional neglect, subscribe now.